The year is 1347, and you're standing in the torture chamber beneath Prague Castle. The air is thick with something that makes your throat close old blood, mixed with fierce sweat and human waste that's soaked into the stone for decades. You can hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing like a countdown. And then you see him. A man named Tomek, a baker accused of putting ground glass in the communion bread. He didn't do it. Everyone knows he didn't do it. But the bishop needs someone to blame for the sickness spreading through the congregation, and Tomek made the mistake of arguing about tithes last month. Now he's strapped to a table that's tilted at a precise 15-degree angle. And the torturer, a man whose family has held this position for 4 generations, is preparing an instrument that looks like it belongs in a physician's bag. Except physicians don't heat their tools until they glow orange. The thing about medieval torture that nobody tells you is this: it wasn't random. It wasn't crude. It was a science, studied and refined with the same dedication monks brought to copying scripture. The men who inflicted this suffering were professionals who understood human anatomy better than most doctors. They knew exactly how much pain a body could endure before the mind shattered completely. They knew the precise moment when a person stopped being human and became simply meat that screamed. And they knew that moment was still hours away for Tomek. What you need to understand before we go further is that everything you think you know about medieval torture is sanitized. The museum displays show you the rack and the Iron Maiden, and you think you understand. You don't. Those were the simple tools, the everyday instruments used for ordinary interrogations. What I'm about to show you goes so far beyond those familiar horrors that medieval authorities themselves destroyed records to prevent public knowledge. Tonight you'll learn about torture methods that exploited psychological principles that modern science didn't identify until the 20th century. You'll discover why certain techniques were designed to keep victims alive and conscious for weeks. You'll see evidence that some practices were so sophisticated they targeted specific nerve clusters that anatomists supposedly didn't know existed. The screening started when they brought out the chairs. Not one chair, 20 of them, arranged in a circle around Tomek. Each chair held someone he knew: his wife, his 3 children, his brother, his neighbors, his customers, all of them bound and gagged, all of them forced to watch what was about to happen. This is what makes you sick to your stomach. The torture hasn't even started yet, and already Tomek is broken. The torturer explains the rules with the patience of a schoolteacher. Every time Tomek refuses to confess, one person in the circle will be hurt. Not Tomek, them. The heated iron currently glowing in the brazier will be pressed against his wife's face, or his son's hands, or his daughter's feet. Tomek gets to choose. The confession they want is simple. Admit you poisoned the communion bread. Name your accomplices in this heresy. Identify who paid you to attack the church. All lies, all impossible. But truth doesn't matter when a man watches his wife's skin bubble and char, because he won't confess to crimes he never committed. This method had no official name in the records. Modern historians call it proxy torture or transferred suffering. Medieval practitioners called it the family circle, and it was considered one of the most effective interrogation techniques ever developed. Not because it inflicted the most pain, it didn't. Because it exploited something deeper than pain, something that makes humans fundamentally human. Our inability to watch loved ones suffer, our willingness to destroy ourselves to protect them. The psychological research wouldn't exist for another 600 years. But medieval torturers discovered through experimentation that watching someone you love experience agony produces more reliable confessions than experiencing agony yourself. A man might endure his own torture for days. That same man will break in minutes when his child screams. Tomek lasted 17 minutes, then he confessed. He described a conspiracy that didn't exist. He named accomplices who were innocent. He provided details about meetings that never happened and payments he never received. And because proxy torture doesn't leave marks on the confessor's body, his confession appeared voluntary. The court recorded that Tomek of Prague, Baker, did willingly and without coercion admit to heretical poisoning and conspiracy against Holy Mother Church. The fact that his wife would carry burn scars for the rest of her life was never mentioned in official documents. The fact that his children watched their father condemn innocent people to save them from further torture was never recorded. The fact that the entire family was executed together 3 weeks later, Tomek by burning, the others by hanging, because they were contaminated by association with a heretic, all of this happened according to proper legal procedure. What makes this method particularly disturbing is that it worked both ways. After confessing to save his family, Tomek was kept alive to watch them die. The torture continued after confession, because the real purpose was never just extraction of information. The real purpose was breaking people so completely that they ceased to exist as coherent selves. Tomek survived his family's execution by 6 days, hanging in a cell, physically unharmed, but psychologically destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. When they finally burned him, witnesses reported he didn't scream. He didn't react at all. The person who had been Tomek was already gone. The instrument looked almost delicate, a metal frame about the size of a birdcage, hinged on one side, with dozens of thin spikes pointing inward from every surface. The spikes were different lengths, some barely a quarter inch, others 3 inches long. All of them were positioned with mathematical precision. This wasn't random. This was engineering. The head cage was designed to be locked around a victim's skull with their face pressed against the longer spikes. Not hard enough to penetrate, not yet, just hard enough to rest against skin with the promise of what would come. Then the torturer would add weights to the top of the cage. Small weights at first, pebbles. Each addition pressed the spikes a fraction of an inch deeper. The torture could last for days because the progression was controlled so carefully. A spike entering the cheek, another piercing the forehead. A woman named Katerina experienced the head cage in Vienna in 1392. Her crime was accusing a nobleman of rape. She was probably telling the truth. The nobleman had a documented history of assaulting servants and peasant women. But truth didn't matter when a commoner accused nobility. The head cage was applied for 4 days. Records describe how the weights were increased gradually, how the spikes entered her face in sequence, how she was kept alive through the entire process by having the cage removed periodically to allow feeding through a tube. By the end, Katerina recanted her accusation. She confessed that she had lied to extort money from the nobleman. She begged forgiveness for her false testimony. None of this was true, but her face was now a mass of infected puncture wounds, and she understood that recanting was the only way to end the torture. She died 3 weeks later when the infections turned septic. The nobleman faced no consequences. The head cage was considered appropriate punishment for false accusation. What forensic pathologists discovered when examining skeletal remains from this period is that some skulls show evidence of multiple spike penetrations that partially healed before death, meaning the cage was applied, removed, allowed to heal slightly, then applied again. The torture was repeated over weeks or months. Some victims experienced the head cage dozens of times, their faces becoming landscapes of scar tissue and bone damage that tell stories written records tried to erase. The psychological element was as brutal as the physical damage. Victims were often shown the cage before application. They were told exactly what would happen. Then they were given the opportunity to confess and avoid the torture entirely. Many did. Those who didn't face the reality that even confession might not end the suffering, because sometimes the torture was prescribed as punishment regardless of guilt or innocence. You confessed or you didn't confess. Either way, you might still face the cage. The arbitrariness was part of the torture. The uncertainty about whether cooperation would actually help created additional psychological pressure that broke people before metal touched skin. Medieval legal theorists wrote extensively about this. They understood that torture worked best when victims couldn't predict whether compliance would bring mercy. Keep them uncertain, keep them hoping, then crush that hope by torturing them anyway. The despair produced by betrayed hope was considered valuable in itself. The cage existed in hundreds of variants across Europe. Some versions included spikes inside the victim's mouth to prevent speech. Others had spikes positioned to threaten the eyes, not quite touching, but close enough that any movement risked blinding. The most elaborate versions were works of craftsmanship that took months to construct, commissioned by wealthy nobility who wanted torture devices that reflected their status. Gold inlay on the frame, engraved religious scenes on the metal, spikes shaped like thorns to evoke Christ's suffering. The symbolism was explicit: criminals suffered as Christ suffered, except Christ was innocent and they were guilty, so their suffering was deserved while his was redemptive. The theological justification for torture went deep into Christian doctrine. Suffering purified, pain brought wisdom. The tortured criminal was being given opportunity for spiritual growth through agony. The fact that most victims simply broke and confessed to anything rather than achieving enlightenment was evidence of their fundamental corruption, not evidence that torture was ineffective or wrong. What happened to those who survived head cage torture? They were marked forever. The scars announced what they had experienced. Employment became impossible. Who would hire someone whose face advertised their criminality? Marriage was impossible. Normal social interaction was impossible. They existed in a permanent state of exclusion, neither properly punished through execution nor properly rehabilitated through mercy. They were living warnings, walking evidence of what authority could do to bodies and faces and lives. The cruelty was the point. Modern apologists sometimes claim medieval torture was about information extraction or justice. The records tell a different story. Torture was about power demonstrating itself on flesh. It was about creating a permanent underclass of the broken and scarred. It was about spectacle and warning and the satisfaction that comes from having absolute authority over another person's capacity to suffer. The confessions were often worthless. The information extracted was frequently false. Medieval legal scholars knew this and documented extensively. They wrote treatises explaining that tortured confessions should be verified through independent evidence. Then they accepted tortured confessions anyway because verification was inconvenient and torture served purposes that had nothing to do with truth. A man with a cage-scarred face walking through a market communicated state power more effectively than any law or decree. That was the real purpose. The suffering itself, prolonged and visible and impossible to deny. We like to think we're different now. We've evolved beyond medieval brutality. We have human rights and conventions and laws that prohibit torture. Except the techniques never actually disappeared. They were renamed. They were sanitized. They were justified through different theological or political frameworks. But the fundamental dynamics power, expressing itself through inflicted suffering, authority breaking bodies to break wills, the systematic destruction of human dignity, all of this continues. The technology changes, the names change. The essential cruelty remains. Remember Katerina with spikes entering her face for days because she told the truth about rape. Remember Tomek forced to confess lies while watching his family tortured. Remember them because they were real people whose suffering was authorized by systems that claimed to represent justice and righteousness and divine will. Remember them because forgetting makes it easier for new systems to authorize new suffering against new victims. The capacity for this exists in every human society. What varies is whether that capacity is unleashed or constrained.